Every year, governments lose billions of dollars legally. Not stolen, not hacked, just gone. And most people never notice. This video isn't about corrupt politicians stuffing cash into suitcases. It's about something more surprising and far more dangerous. Governments lose money the same way a giant ship sinks, not because of one big hole, but thousands of tiny leaks no one ever checks. Some leaks come from overly generous tax rules, some from financial tricks that sound too boring to investigate, some from companies that exist only on paper, and others from systems that were designed to protect the economy, yet slowly drain it instead. By the end of this video, you'll understand something that almost nobody truly sees. Governments don't just lose money because someone breaks the rules. They lose money because the rules themselves guarantee it. Let's start with the first leak, the one every country has, and almost no citizen understands: the legal holes that shouldn't exist. Tax loopholes sound minor, but at the government level, they become massive structural gaps. A loophole is simply a rule that follows the law, but not the purpose of the law. Governments design tax systems for stability, yet as codes grow longer and more complex, unplanned openings appear. Companies discover them, lawyers expand them, and whole industries slowly depend on them. The result? Governments lose money legally and silently. A deduction meant to encourage investment gets reinterpreted into something that creates no jobs or growth. The rule stays, its purpose vanishes, the revenue disappears. Loopholes also multiply. One becomes normal, another stacks on top, and soon entire financial ecosystems revolve around exploiting gaps rather than producing value. And the imbalance is huge. Closing a loophole takes years. Creating one takes a single sentence. That's why billions slip away without notice. The cum-ex and cum-cum trick. This is the closest real life gets to a legal heist. Cum-ex and cum-cum weren't crimes hiding in the shadows. They were investors and banks using timing and paperwork the system wasn't built to handle. The basic flaw: governments refund taxes if they appear to be paid twice. Traders figured out how to make the same tax look like it was paid multiple times, even though it wasn't. So governments issued multiple refunds for a single payment. Billions gone. Imagine returning one shirt and receiving several refunds because the system thinks multiple people owned it. That's cum-ex. Cum-cum was similar. Foreign investors temporarily shifted shares to locals before dividend payouts to bypass taxes entirely. Both relied on precise timing, high-speed trading, complex legal engineering, regulators unable to track it fast enough. And for years, none of this was technically illegal. Nothing was falsified. The law's wording was followed exactly. Only its intent was broken. This is how invisible losses work. The system is too slow to stop the loopholes built inside it. Shell companies, the businesses that don't exist but still make money. Next leak, companies that exist only on paper. A shell company can be created in minutes. It has no employees, no office, and no real activity. But it can move money, hold assets, reduce taxes, and hide ownership. And because shells exist in a legal gray zone, shutting them down is nearly impossible. Why do they drain government money? Simple. Shell companies allow wealth to move across borders without triggering the taxes normally applied to real businesses. A company can earn revenue in one country, but legally report the profit in another country with extremely low tax rates, even if it has no real operations there. Nothing illegal, just clever paperwork. The result? Countries lose tax revenue even when their economies grow. GDP increases, corporate activity rises, but the tax base shrinks. Governments look at the numbers and wonder, how is the economy growing, but our revenue isn't? The answer is buried inside thousands of shell companies that were designed specifically to make profits invisible. This practice doesn't require corruption, it doesn't require secrecy, it doesn't require violence or crime. It requires only one thing: a border where one side has higher taxes than the other. The subsidy trap. When governments pay for things that don't need paying for. Subsidies are meant to support industries that benefit society. But when subsidies aren't tracked, or when industries learn how to maximize them without delivering results, the system becomes a drain instead of an investment. A government may pay a company to produce a certain material domestically. If production drops, funding increases to encourage growth. But some companies discover that staying just inefficient enough makes them eligible for greater subsidies every year. When that happens, governments pay more and receive less. This is known in economics as a perverse incentive, a rule that encourages the opposite of what it was designed for. And here's the key insight: perverse incentives usually outlast the institutions that created them. Governments change, policies change, economic priorities change, but subsidies rarely disappear because removing them can anger industries, regions, and jobs. stops, so governments keep paying, year after year, sometimes for decades, and the public rarely notices because subsidy spending looks harmless on paper. It's spread out, technical, and buried inside budgets no one reads. But when combined over time, it becomes one of the most predictable and least discussed ways governments lose money. Government guarantees, the quiet money sink. A government guarantee seems harmless, a promise to cover debts if something goes wrong. But the psychology of guarantees is where the problem begins. When companies know the government will save them, they take bigger risks. They borrow more. They invest in riskier ventures. They expand faster than their industry supports. The government rarely pays at first. Everything looks normal. But if a crisis hits, governments suddenly owe massive payouts. Not because they invested poorly, but because they made promises years earlier without preparing for the consequences. Guarantees can be for banks, for private companies, for infrastructure projects, or even international partnerships. Most guarantees never appear on the national budget. They sit quietly in the background, invisible liabilities. But when something breaks, they become real overnight. This is how governments lose money, not through spending, but through promises they never expected to keep. Systemic incentive failures. When everyone follows the rules, and the system still breaks. The final leak is the most dangerous. Sometimes, every actor in a system behaves perfectly rationally, and the end result is still financially destructive. This is the definition of systemic failure. For example, a tax incentive encourages companies to reinvest profits. Great in theory, but if every company reinvests only through activities that maximize deductions, the tax base collapses. A subsidy encourages renewable technology, but if companies manipulate reporting to qualify for grants, governments pay for progress that doesn't actually happen. A guarantee stabilizes banks, but if banks rely on it instead of managing risk, governments absorb the losses. In each case, nobody breaks the rules. Nobody behaves maliciously, nobody commits fraud. They simply optimize for the incentives they're given, and the system loses money exactly as designed. This is why these leaks continue. They are not mistakes. They are predictable side effects of complex systems. Fixing them requires changing the system, not the people inside it. And that is the hardest change of all, why no one is accountable. Here's the moment that shocks most viewers. Once the money is lost, there is rarely a single person responsible. The accountant didn't break the law. The investors didn't hide anything. The companies followed the rules. The regulators followed the rules. Even the politicians followed the rules. So who's at fault? Nobody. And also everybody. This is why governments keep losing money. The rules are too complex. The gaps are too profitable. The incentives are misaligned. The system moves slower than the people using it. And accountability disappears in the complexity forward. This is why the leaks continue, quietly, legally, endlessly. The open ending. And that brings us to the final truth. The system doesn't leak money because it's broken. It leaks money because it works exactly as built, for the people who know how to use it. Every loophole has a lobby. Every subsidy has a supporter. Every guarantee has a justification. Every incentive has a defender. So the leaks never fully close. They simply evolve. And that's why governments keep losing money without anyone noticing. Not through corruption, not through crime, but through a system designed with good intentions that still manages to drain billions every single year.